But first, this question. What do we do? How do we do this? There's all this talk about, bailing out the auto industry, and of course, right-wing talk radio is just going out of their way to blame the entire thing on the UAW, which is nonsense. And then, you've got people, kicking around management at GM, Ford, and Chrysler. There's something to be said for that. I would submit to you that management of these companies, and I say this as a guy who grew up in Lansing, Michigan. I don't know if it was most, but many of my friends' fathers worked at the automobile assembly plant in Lansing, or in businesses associated with it. My dad worked in a tool and die shop that was associated with that industry, and there really was a cleavage. And there, from the days of Henry Ford to today, and you find the management. I mean, one of the senior VPs at GM made the comment. Well, I believe it was GM, might have been Ford, made the comment that global warming was a crock of expletive deleted. So there's long been this cleavage between the Bloomfield Hills Republicans who were running the car companies and the Democrats who were working in them. And I would submit to you that some members of the Michigan congressional delegation over the years have, even Democratic members, and I would put John Dingell, frankly, in this camp, have not always worked in the best interest of the workers, because they've been so anxious to fall all over themselves for management, which has been largely Republican, and promoting Republican memes. But there's a larger issue here at stake. We are looking at a confluence of events that could be disastrous. First of all, from today's Financial Times, the headline, "Crash in Oil Exploration Puts World on a, quote, bad path," end quote. Lack of investment in new sources of oil risks a supply crunch worse than the problems that pushed prices to $147 a barrel this summer. The International Energy Agency warned that cuts and delays in investment that were prompted by the fall in oil prices had put the world on a bad path. So what's happening is that as the price of oil is falling, the oil companies are going, we don't need to drill anymore. We need to stop drilling, in fact, and stop exploring and drive up the price. They go on to note in the article, meeting the demand growth is secondary to the big challenge of compensating for the fast declining production of the world's older fields. Demand currently, last year, is 85 million barrels a day. They're expecting by 2030 it'll be 106 million barrels a day. But the fields experiencing the sharpest declines are where? The North Sea and Alaska. This means the West, the Financial Times concludes, would become less and less of an influence in terms of production, while Persian Gulf countries would become more important. At the same time, as the result of burning all this oil, Ed Crooks in London, writing in today's Financial Times, business as usual policies would have shocking consequences for the climate, raising average temperatures of up to 6 degrees centigrade. What 6 degrees centigrade increase in worldwide temperatures would do is melt all the ice at the North and South Poles. It means New York City would be underwater. Half of Florida would vanish. This is literally the path we are on right now. And what they say is that the price of emissions in a system that would simply constrain us to 2 degrees Celsius of temperature increase over the next 50 years rather than 6 degrees, not enough necessarily to melt all that ice and cause all that damage, but enough to still make hurricanes and tornadoes worse and all kinds of problems. That to do that, carbon has to be priced at $180 a ton, carbon dioxide. That's just to get us to 450 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere. Whereas right now in the EU, carbon is trading in the cap and trade markets of Europe, is not trading at $180 a ton, what it has to be set at in order to provide an incentive to drive production down to that level. Instead, it's trading at $23 a ton. But here's the deal. General Motors is making 100% of, let me restart that. 100% of the cars General Motors is making in Brazil are flex fuel cars. It costs about $100 more to make a flex fuel car than it does to make a gasoline car. $100. And for that $100, less than the cost of the seatbelt system. And for that $100, what you can do then is you can put gasoline in the tank. You can put ethanol in the tank. You can put methanol, which you can make out of coal. China is making methanol out of coal right now. China has coal the way Saudi Arabia has oil. We do as well, by the way. And they're making methanol out of that oil, or out of that coal. And they're making flex fuel vehicles in China. You can mix methanol and gasoline. You can mix methanol, gasoline, and hybrid technology. I mean, just consider. First of all, here's the big frame. We have the capacity. We're producing about 3% of the world's oil, and we might have the capacity to produce 4% of the world's oil. If we were to drill, baby, drill tomorrow. First of all, do you think that if we drilled all that oil off our coast and in Alaska that's there, if we drilled all of that, would that reduce the price of oil? No. Why? Because 30 years ago, OPEC was producing 30 million barrels a day of oil. Today, OPEC, which has now included 2 new countries, Ecuador and I'm forgetting what the other one is. They've added 2 new countries, which in aggregate equal the production of Norway. It was substantial oil production. OPEC is only producing 32 million barrels. 30 years later, their production has actually gone down because they've added these 2 new countries. So what happens if we drill, baby, drill? Let's say that we increase production by 1% for the world. OPEC will simply reduce their production by 1% to keep prices the same. Drill, baby, drill is a lie. Newt Gingrich is promoting a lie. It will not save anybody on the cost of gasoline. I mean, let's just lay some of this stuff out, number one. And number two, we consume a quarter of the world's oil, yet we only produce 3%, 3/100ths. Now, what makes this important is oil is a strategic resource. And the reason why is because it has nothing to do with electricity. I had T. Boone Pickens on this show, and he was, we need to get off oil. We need to build windmills to produce electricity. Only 2% of our electricity in this country is made by oil. Now think about that for a minute. Only 2% of the electricity in the United States is produced from oil. So if we just eliminated all oil-produced electricity, it would be a relatively meaningless improvement in our electricity situation. If we replace those 2% with windmills, it's going to do nothing. The problem is that our entire transportation sector is driven by oil. That's what makes oil strategic. So how do we, number one, save the auto industry, number two, break the back of Al-Qaeda because they're getting much of their funding from Saudi Arabia and other oil countries, and three, save the climate, save the planet, and four, strip oil of its strategic value. This is the key to the whole thing. This is the important thing. Oil is a resource worth fighting wars over right now. As Ann Coren points out from the Institute for Global Security and Energy Analysis, salt was once a strategic resource because it was used to preserve meat. And literally wars were fought over salt. Since refrigeration, we don't fight wars over salt anymore because we've got better ways to preserve meat. Oil is only a strategic resource because we use it for transportation. And about 3/4 of all the oil used in the United States is used for cars and trucks. The other quarter is used to heat homes, make plastics, make pesticides, insecticides, things like that. If we could take that 3/4 of our oil that we use and stop using it for transportation, that is used for cars and trucks, and stop using it for cars and trucks, it would no longer be a strategic resource. It would break the back of Al-Qaeda. How do we do that? With our auto industry. I'll tell you how.
This is the Thom